My name's Kim Kenyon. I call myself a joy coach. I do lots of things within that structure. One of them I do is help people redefine themselves in terms of their career. And so that's what we're going to be talking a little bit about today. You've probably already seen some information about this session. Our title is Redesigning Your Professional Materials. And part of it is we're also thinking about reimagining yourself potentially. So let's shift to just give a little bit of an overview of what we're going to do together. That was our welcome, kind of shortened because we're just doing this as a secondary component if you were unable to come to the session. I'm going to briefly mention the outcomes for the session, give a little bit of an overview and context, and then there'll be a number of activities, and there's an accompanying worksheet. You will have that link up on the Onward site. I would invite you to make a copy of it and use it as a work along throughout the session today. If you've not already done that, please make sure that you locate that worksheet, make a copy of it for yourself now. You might want to pause the video and go off and do that and then come back. And then the last part, I'm going to try and recreate a couple of questions that I was asked during the session, because obviously we're not truly live together, so you won't have an opportunity to ask me those questions. So, as I already mentioned, there's some other components that you will need. You'll have the copy to the slide deck, which is the session link that's also up on the Onward site. You want to make sure that you get that worksheet and open it up. And then, I often ask folks at this point to just think a little bit about how they identify, and that typically has to do with your specialty. And the reason for that is actually going to come up a little bit later in the session. So if there is a particular way that you identify, you just make a note of that. If I think about my identity right now is joy coach, right? But I've changed and I've metamorphosized throughout the years. One of my previous identities was I was a professor. So if we're thinking about what are you now? What is your specialty? How do you identify? You might want to make a note of that for yourself. So we have three main things that we're going to seek to do today. And so one of the things is if I'm thinking about the big difference essentially between an academic CV or research CV, the materials that we might use within specific roles in the university setting or college setting versus a resume. And when I think of a resume, I typically say like industry style professional documents, but a resume is really what I'm talking about. And so we'll go more in depth with that. And then there's quite a bit of depth also in the accompanying worksheet because this is a short session. You're not going to get everything in the time frame that we're together. And the other thing is being able to expand upon the information that you might have previously provided in a resume. Maybe you're going to be revising a resume or your CV, because CVs often tell something like, oh, I had this title, but they don't actually give anyone information about what you did within that. So we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between show and tell, because it's very important if we're looking for positions, especially if we want to change what we've been doing, that we can make it very clear, like kind of open the window into what we're able to do so that people would be interested and then potentially offering us an interview. That would be the critical piece. And then we're going to work on some specific little sections just as drafts. And then the worksheet will invite you to revisit those after the session that you're working on now. This process of actually coming up with short drafts, kind of pausing the video and going back to it, I think is better than doing a really deep dive into all the different sections today, whatever your day is, right? Might be night. So, but I'm just going to mention that. Obviously, it's completely up to you what you do, but I would suggest that you kind of go along with this, use the worksheet, do some initial thinking. And the reason for that is it's about how our brains work, right? So it's like you're planting seeds, then you go off and do other things you need to do. You're still kind of thinking subconsciously about some of these seeds that you've planted. Then when you come back to the worksheet and you flesh things out a little bit more, you've actually been using all of your thinking about your thinking, that idea of metacognition in the background. So that can give you a deeper kind of ability the second time around, and maybe even you revisit it a third time. So our first activity, at this point, you would pause your video, read through the questions, and then I would recommend having made a copy of your worksheet and then answering questions on your worksheet. So this would be your opportunity to pause and actually do this drafting. And the only other thing I would add about this slide, whoops, sorry, I got my controls kind of in my way. Give me 1 second here. Um, is to think about maybe focusing on one particular position, um, and then thinking about those verbs that are associated with it. So you go off and you actually write something after you pause the video, and then we're going to shift to kind of a little bit of a contextualization for the session. So that was kind of the icebreaker, but it's a very valuable one. So hopefully you took a couple minutes to do that. Now, I think it's important to really consider why we're here, right? So for most folks that are taking part in this session, they're very similar to a lot of colleagues that I work with. They have a professional identity, and maybe that professional identity is kind of tied up with their personal identity. And so what's happening in the US market in terms of jobs, and globally in some cases as well, is that we're being asked to shift that identity, right? And so that can be really, really difficult if I'm thinking about having to shift away from the professional identity that we've had, particularly if it's intertwined with our personal identity, can feel very much like a death, like a big loss. And so I hope that you're taking very, very good care of yourself while you're working on this, because it's not easy to do. And I hope that you are able to look upon this as whatever your specialty has been, and then maybe slash explorer, right? So instead of thinking about it as, oh, this is pejorative, I wish that this wasn't happening to me, which of course you will at times, I'm sure. Um, but to think a little bit about what are the opportunities? What is the universe going to give me the ability to do that still maybe resonates with my values? There was a session I did on values and sense of purpose back in September, and that might even be of interest for you to explore after this session. So if I'm thinking about why, markets are crazy, right? In terms of finding positions, it could be that you have a specialty where there's like 5 job openings for the entire year next year, and then the competition is fierce. So if we're thinking about market being tough, um, positions being limited, being inaccessible even. For example, they might have requirements that you don't currently have, even though you did the job someplace else. Now you would need to get additional credentials in order to adhere. Or if we're looking at some of the federal government changes in the US, there might have been positions that really aligned with what you've previously done in the government or non-governmental organizations, but those positions currently have either been cut back or they are not funded because of the changes in the federal government. So wherever we are in terms of where we landed, we have to think about what do we do now, right? And so this is where that curiosity and creativity and innovation come in. And so how do we look at what's out there in the landscape that would overlap with the things that we're really good at? Kind of going back to the icebreaker question, right? And then what are the things that we're able to do that are actually things that people are looking for out there in the market? And how can we communicate that in the best possible way so that our cover letter, our LinkedIn profile, our resume, our materials, maybe it's revising your CV as well, but our materials basically enable us to have somebody get to really look at what we're able to do and then invite us potentially for an interview, or then we get an opportunity to showcase even further those abilities. So we're going to go through a series of activities. I'll mention this one more time. If you haven't grabbed that worksheet, make sure you have it. It's helpful to have everything be in one place. And let's kind of take a look at the first one. So we started out with that icebreaker, kind of getting a little bit of a sense of ourselves. What I'd like you to do now is to take about maybe 7 to 10 minutes and just briefly answer these questions. So you're going to pause the video, go back to the worksheet, briefly answer these questions. And by briefly, I mean put down some words, maybe a short phrase, right? If you find that you can do more than that, great. But try to set the timer on your phone and don't really do a deep dive now. Just do 7 to 10 minutes. I'm giving you time to grab your phone and get yourself situated and then pause. Okay, so you've done a little bit of an inventory. Now, what I'd like you to do is to think about, okay, so where are these skills, these strengths that I already possess? What sectors, what industries, um, where might these be useful? And so I'm giving you some examples of potential ideas for some skills that you might have. But then I'm also asking you to just take a minute to note for yourself what other sectors or roles could use what you excel at. And then instead of sharing one idea in the chat, just make a note for yourself on your worksheet. So pause now, take a minute, just make a note for yourself. Okay, welcome back. So let's shift from making that note for yourself to actually thinking a little bit about this idea of expansion, exploration and expansion, right? So how can I shift to talk about myself in different ways? I use the word I used to here. You don't have to say I used to because maybe you're going to continue to apply as your previous role, and you're going to apply in relation to expanding your identity and exploring new ways to express yourself. So it could be an either or situation, right? It doesn't have to be one or the other. It could be both. So if I'm thinking about this idea of a formula, though, for really talking about yourself, I'm giving you this structure to embrace and then an example. And so what I'd like you to do is to then write your own example, right? So you might pause. Oops, let's go back for a second. Oh my goodness, we got extra slides here. It's going to happen, right? So take a minute, respond to this on your worksheet. Maybe this actually you want to take 2 or 3 minutes to do this. I think this isn't that easy to do, honestly. So 2 to 3 minutes, pause in the video, and then come back. And welcome back. So if we're looking at what I alluded to in the beginning, just talking a little bit about the difference between CVs and resumes. So if we think about, there's usually two different types of CVs that people have. They're both for the academic space. If I'm thinking about like most of the time, it's only academia that looks at curricula vitae, CVs. So they're very long documents, right? And honestly, they don't really say a lot. If we're thinking about to people outside of the academic world, there's a lot of reading between the lines. There's not concrete information in quite a lot of our CVs. They just don't really say a lot. And so part of it is we may need to create resumes. So I know that I had a question during the session when I did it live. Somebody was asking me, do we need to use resumes for academic administrative positions? And the answer to that is yes. Those are not academic positions. They are not positions that ask for a CV. They really want to know what you can do. And so your resume has to actually show them that. And one of the ways that we think about showing is actually to focus on skills, right? So let's also just take a couple minutes to look at the worksheet and look at the section that has some examples of the sections, the kind of the categories that are the layout of a CV versus a resume. Because you're going to notice that there's different categories and that the order is actually different. So if we're thinking about where we put our education, for example, in a CV is typically right up at the top, right? We kind of lead with that. But in a resume, it's one of the things that's later on in there. So looking at the categories in the order is pretty important for you in terms of maybe revising your resume or creating a resume. And then if you're looking at examining your CV, it could be that you're thinking about, oh, wait a second, does my CV actually utilize these categories and in this order? So that's another place that might be useful for you to make some revisions. We don't have a break. This was during the session, didn't take the slide out, but I would invite you to maybe take a few minutes for yourself, get something to drink, use the restroom, and then come back. Maybe pause for 5 minutes and then come back. It's always a good thing to take a little bit of a break. And then hopefully you took a break and welcome back. So one of the methods that we use to be able to provide that insight, kind of that opening the window up into what we're able to do, is this STAR method. And some folks may have heard about this before. Um, it's just an acronym. And if I'm thinking about, I'm giving an example of what it might be to tell from the academic space, right? What did you do for your doctoral research? So the tell is kind of just stating, this is what I did, right? But the show is thinking about situation, task, actions, and results. And so that's more impact. And this is the format that's really, really helpful for your resume. So you might just take uh, one position that you've had and actually think about one project or one thing that one experience within that position, and then think about integrating this STAR method. Um, I'm going to just flip to the next slide. So this is crafting the STAR story, right? And so this breaks out the STAR acronym with a couple little questions that you might use for crafting your STAR story. And I think it's really valuable to write this out on the worksheet, just some ideas about, the challenge, the goal, what you did, what was the outcome or the impact. And the other thing that I want to mention is that if you were part of a team, you want to differentiate between what did you do versus what did the team do, right? Because that's really important. That goes back to the showing what you can do. Um, and then you might not get to this part where you completely write one bullet point combining these sentences today. Maybe you're just going to get through the story part. Could be though that you revisit this and you use ChatGPT to give you a little bit of help. So you write out the star story main ideas, and then you paste it into ChatGPT and you say, hey, can you help me to write one bullet point about my star story? Because that, can help you to synthesize it. And maybe you ask it to write it in three different ways. ChatGPT isn't smart. It's not good at everything. But if we tell it exactly what we want it to do and then we review and ask it additional questions, it can be very, very helpful, particularly in doing things like summarizing, synthesizing, providing different ways of looking at something. So I'm going to suggest that you pause and you take 3 minutes to just jot down some ideas, briefly describing your star story. Okay, so sometimes when we think about the positions that we've had before, we have done many, 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 many things within that position. Like we end up having like a big, big, long list. For your resume, you're not going to be able to share all that information. So you want to think about consolidating it. And one of the ways that we do that is we go back to this idea of impact, right? And so broad impact statements include things that relate to scope, scale, depth, breadth. I mean, that's essentially what they communicate. So, a classic example that I often give is one of my previous positions. I directed an academic program. I oversaw 10 people. I had 1,000 students we worked with per academic year. 400 of them took classes with us. 400 of them took assessments with us. 200 of them participated in workshops, and 200 of them were in a summer program. We typically were working with 35 students from 35 different countries and language backgrounds, something like that. So part of it is the idea of writing a broad bullet underneath one of your previous positions before you have some more star stories beneath it. So like for each position that you're highlighting, and if we think about a resume, you can only highlight 3 positions usually. And under each of those positions, you would have an overview bullet like this, and then you would have 2 to 3 star story bullets below. So the goal would be in the resume in totality is that the positions aren't an echo effect, right? We know that you've done many, many, many things within these jobs. You're showcasing different things. What are you showcasing? You're thinking about the job description. I mean, you can create a template for an industry. You can create like a resume that fits with a particular area, say like UX research or something. And then once you've created that template, you have those positions, you have selected professional experience, you have the title of the position, how long you worked there, etc., the job role. Um, then you have the overview bullet, the star bullets. You don't want those 3 positions that you've chosen to all overlap with each other, right? You have limited space to demonstrate, to actually show what you can do. So maybe because you've done many, many things in all these different positions, you choose different things to highlight that fit the job description. And if we're looking at when you create your cover letter also should be bringing in your first paragraph, a synopsis of yourself in relation to the position description and the values that the organization is attesting to based on you looking at their mission, vision, values on their website. So you want something about your fit in relation to values in that first paragraph and just a little bit of an overview of you in relation to the job description. Your second and your third paragraph are actually going to focus on star as well, but you don't want that to actually echo anything that's in the resume. So this is a challenge to kind of think through these things. But what you're doing then is you're providing that open window into what you can do very, very clearly to the folks that are interested in examining the cover letter, which maybe then gets them to really read your resume, which doesn't always happen. But if your cover letter showcases, ooh, wow, this person's got some things they can do that relate to the position, using some of the language from the position description, same thing. If we're looking at the resume, oh, this person can do some things that we need in this position, using some of the language, kind of overlapping that language, because you know that a lot of times your resume is read by a computer, a resume reader that's actually a computer. So some strategies and tactics. Um, anyway, I'm just giving a little bit of context for some of those things. The last part would be just indicating how you'd be a good fit for their position and how you're interested in the opportunity to share a little bit more about that in terms of the cover letter. I'm going to invite you to think about what I've said, maybe jot down some notes for yourself that are going to help you to revise your resume or create one if you don't have it. Maybe you're jotting down some notes for yourself about cover letters, because even though we're not talking about that expressly, it is interconnected, and I wanted to be sure to give you some ideas about that. And then just take 3 minutes to draft your own example of a position overview bullet and make a note of that in your worksheet. Okay, so we're shifting, coming back together to think a little bit about your professional summary. So resumes typically have a summary at the beginning of them, and the goal is to actually answer these questions. And it's kind of not in the form of a question, but the elements that are at the top, essentially. You want to give a little bit of context into your background, and you want to think a little bit about highlighting skills and expertise, accomplishments and strengths in relation to the job ad, right? And then the same thing would be essentially talking a little bit about your career direction or goals and how it aligns with the job ad. And it might be that the position that you're looking into is a big shift. And so you might be thinking about explaining that you're pivoting, like that you're shifting in terms of looking at exploring new areas. So this is something that um, you might be indicating in your professional summary. And you might also, going back to that cover letter, if you're shifting to a completely new, like new, I'll say new area. Um, so for example, you were a researcher and you did lots of research, but now you're applying for a position as a project manager. It might be that that project management position is looking for you to have had extensive project management experience. Now, researchers have that, but you might need to draw the lines. Like you might need to be really clear as to how your experience translates, right? That transferable skills. And it could be that the job description is asking you for some skills that aren't clearly laid out on your resume. So, for example, a particular software. So it might be that you draw some correlation between the software that they're asking you to learn and other softwares you already learned that mimic, do the kind of the same thing, right? Or you might mention in your cover letter that you're already in the process of getting a certificate from Coursera or someplace else in that project management software that they're asking you to be knowledgeable about. So I'm mentioning this, it's like a little bit beyond the professional summary, but I know this was one of the questions I got in the live session, so I'm talking about it now. If I think about samples of professional summaries, gave you a couple of these here. So now you would pause, think about the overview idea, think about the samples, and you would create your own. So write or revise, kind of a short profile summary. These are usually pretty short. They're only 3 to 5 sentences. There's those prompts essentially that are on your worksheet. So pause the video and take maybe 5 minutes to craft your answers and create a draft of your professional summary. So we didn't get an opportunity to do this activity of pasting your profile summary in the chat. But what I would invite you to do is to talk with some colleagues. You know, if you're thinking about looking for jobs in isolation is difficult. Uh, who are some folks who've recently been hired that you know of? And what kind of professional summaries have they used? Could be beneficial to start a conversation with them, ask them to share those with you. It could be that you have a group of folks that you're on a listserv with, or you're on LinkedIn with, that where you could say, hey, I'm really curious if folks would be able to share their professional summaries from their resume with me. And you might engage in a little bit of conversation, share yours, um, get some more ideas from folks about those as well. So I want to segue into thinking about LinkedIn. So LinkedIn, we don't update LinkedIn until after we've thought about skills, like transferable skills, thought deeply about a resume, thought about what kind of roles we would like to pivot into. Part of it is really you want to have a clear picture of that before you update LinkedIn or create a LinkedIn profile. If you don't have one, I highly recommend that you create one. LinkedIn is a very useful tool. It also enables you to present a different view of yourself and use more words to do that than a one-page resume. And so part of it is, if I think about LinkedIn, it's similar to what I was saying before in terms of having different examples on your cover letter than what you have on your resume. It's the same thing for LinkedIn. You want to think about the language. Maybe you're going to use a thesaurus to help you to utilize similar language to express yourself so that you don't have the same words. You really do not want to have anyone think that you have a limited repertoire of what you can do or vocabulary, right? And so part of it is just kind of think about that before you step into this idea of working on your LinkedIn profile. And so I am going to invite you to do this activity. Like I said, after you've done some of this other stuff a little bit more intentionally, but this is an activity you can do practice now and just take 2 minutes to, note a field or a role that you might want to, move into. I give you an example here. And then actually pick something you've done from the past and rewrite one of your bullet points to kind of highlight your transferable skills. So here you might not have the full on star method for everything, but you might think about re-representing what you've done so that it really fits an industry as opposed to the academic space. So take 5 minutes and pause the video and go back to your worksheet and work on these two things that I just mentioned. Okay, so one more component of LinkedIn. After you've thought about these different things, roles and sectors and ideas, now you want to think a little bit about your headline. You also want to think about updating LinkedIn so it says open to work, right? That can be helpful too if you haven't already done that. I have another little formula that you might use for rewriting or writing your headline. And what I want you to be doing with this potentially is thinking forward, right? So this idea of like stretching yourself, expanding, exploring new horizons. If you previously identified, as I did, as professor or lawyer or economist, whatever your previous title was that was maybe intertwined with your, personal identity, it's not like you can't still have that there if you're going to be continuing to apply for those positions, but I would invite you to think broader than that. And if that avenue, like to explore that previous position, isn't open to you, then I would think about exploring multiple different ways that you might be in the workplace and show up a little bit differently, right? So if I think about myself, if you go to my LinkedIn profile, you'll see that I say joy coach, but I also mention that I do sound bowl healing and I do consulting and, a range of things. And so I have multiple facets of my professional identity that I'm showcasing now. So anyway, you could think about using this formula. Maybe you end up having a couple of different examples, like I said, where you highlight a current strength or identity, and you also give information about a target field or aspiration. So take 5 minutes, pause the video, head off to the worksheet, and draft something for yourself. So for coming back, similar thing. You don't necessarily have the opportunity to paste your headline into the chat and see what everybody else has done. But what you could do is you could go on to LinkedIn and do a little bit of a search to see um, what are people doing that have previously, if we're looking at, have previously had the same credentials as yourself, who've reinvented themselves? Because this is actually really interesting. If you look around, you're going to find, hey, this person used to work in this way, now they're doing this. You might see some ideas in terms of headlines and also in kind of like the more descriptive information that folks give about themselves. LinkedIn can be super interesting. Um, you'll find a range of ways that people have expressed themselves. And I think about Chat GPT can also be super helpful if you convey some things that you would like to really showcase in your LinkedIn profile. If you ask ChatGPT to flesh that out for you, it's not bad at giving you some ideas. So you may want to also work a little bit with ChatGPT to revise some of the elements from your resume to put them up onto your LinkedIn profile. So you can even ask it to help you with some of that variation in language. Just double check it because, like I said, it's not smart. So you definitely want to double check whatever it writes. So I would invite you on your worksheet to just think about the session today and what's one insight for yourself that you plan to build on, and then what's one way that this opportunity to kind of think will help you to better communicate your expertise. And I would invite you to put these responses into your worksheet because these takeaways are things to build on for yourself. Unfortunately, we don't have the opportunity to do a Q&A with each other. I did mention a couple of the questions that I was asked. I just want to respond to another one that I remember. So I had somebody asking a little bit about whether or not they should talk about their skills in general, or whether or not they should talk about their skills in relation to their positions. And this kind of I just brought my mind to the different types of resumes that exist. And so there is such a thing called a skill-based resume. I'll be honest with you, I don't really recommend those. And the reason being is that most recruiters who are looking at hiring people really like to see the skills represented, as I explained before, as that overview star bullet and then those star bullets below the position. Now, that being said, if we look at the structure for a resume, we have kind of the header, just background information, who I am, my name and my email. And that email should be only one email, and it should be an email that's going to be constant. So if you have a short-term appointment somewhere, don't give them a short-term appointment email. Give them a constant email. And then your LinkedIn profile should be in that header. Your phone number should be in that header, right? And then below that, you want your professional summary. And then you do want to think about having key skills. And key skills is brief. And typically it's categorized. So if we think about something like technology skills or analytical skills or intercultural skills, those might be some categories. And then there's a couple of examples of things after that, but it's short. Key skills is short. Then we have selected professional experience. That's where the STAR method stuff comes in. So you pick 3 of your previous positions, and then you think about showcasing different examples using the STAR method below. One other question that I just remembered that I got was somebody had asked me whether or not they could showcase skills within a volunteer position. And that was a great question. So certainly you could, but we have to think about the space in the resume. So maybe instead of highlighting 3 or 4 professional positions, you're highlighting 2 or 3. And then you have a selected volunteer experience, and you're explaining your title of your role, the organization, the dates you did it, and then you're using the STAR overview bullet and 2 to 3 STAR examples below. Because there's no reason we would show that volunteer experience unless it really was a way to open that window into our strengths and abilities. I hope that this session was helpful for you today. I always invite folks to shoot me an email if you have questions, and I hope to see you at the next session, which is coming up on November 20th. We will be drawing upon some of the ideas from this session if you were able to take part in it, and that session is on networking. It was wonderful seeing you today virtually, and I hope that you get an opportunity to reflect further on the worksheet after today's experience. Bye now.